शुक्रिया आप सबका और आइसा के साथियों का इस बहुत महत्वपूर्ण विषय पर बातचीत करने के लिए इस आयोजन के लिए। मुझे याद आ रहा था पिछली मर्तबा जब मैं यहाँ आया था गाज़ा पर, जब आप लोगों की मीटिंग थी, मैं भी आमिर आप थे और शायद सोमवार थे। हाँ, बहरहाल तो मुझे याद आ रहा था कि उस वक्त हम लोग जो बात किए थे, मैं थोड़ा मिला जुला के ही बोलूँगा सो दैट दोज हु डोंट अंडरस्टैंड हिंदी कैन ऑल्सो फॉलो। तो उसमें आई रिमेंबर दैट आई हैड एट दैट पॉइंट रिमार्क्ड दैट आई डोंट सी दिस Zionist state lasting for very long in the way in which it is, and obviously it was something which at that time seemed very improbable, though the signs were possibly there. लेकिन इस दौरान जो कुछ हुआ उसमें अब हम ये कह सकते हैं कि आज अगर सितंबर 2024 के मुकाबले देखें तो दुनिया बहुत बदल चुकी है और काफ़ी हद तक इज़राइल का जो आइसोलेशन है आज दुनिया भर में, वो इस तरह का है जो उस वक्त नहीं था। उस वक्त एक तरह से पूरा, जिसे मैं एक्सिस ऑफ ईविल कहता हूँ, यूनाइटेड किंगडम, यूएसए और यूरोप, ये एक्सिस ऑफ ईविल पूरी मुस्तैदी से इज़राइल के साथ खड़ा था और पूरी जेनोसाइड का जस्टिफिकेशन ये लोग किए जा रहे थे। जेनोसाइड को कबूल न करना और इज़राइल के राइट टू एग्जिस्ट के नाम पे जो कुछ भी वो करता है नरसंहार, वो सब करने की इजाज़त जो है वो इन्होंने दी हुई थी। सो दैट इज़ वाई आई थिंक इट्स इम्पोर्टेंट फॉर अस टू मार्क व्हाट हैज़ चेंज्ड इन दिस पीरियड। एंड आई थिंक द फर्स्ट very important thing, which is of course Donald Trump has a very important role to play in it, but that is not, it's not simply an individual called Donald Trump. It is also a fact, and that there are some very important structural limitations within which already the signs of the decline of the US empire were quite visible at that time. And what we have now, what we are seeing now, is a result of that. It's a different matter that with someone like Trump, it acquired actually a kind of almost mad comic dimension. I mean, which war is actually conducted by an which war is ever conducted by an insomniac sitting at 3 o'clock at night and writing truth social posts that this will be the next step of the war? Can you imagine a war being fought like this? So every few days you actually have some new social media post which announces the next stage of the war, and obviously by that evening or the next day, either he has to chicken out or he has to retract, whatever it is. So Trump of course has a role to play here, and it could not but have alienated the military within the United States. The United States armed forces were not actually taking decisions, or the Pentagon in fact, even though it has to formally fall by those decisions, they obviously do not or cannot implement it. Then they know. So this is one of those situations where, and the other part of course where Trump makes a big difference is that when the meeting with Benjamin Netanyahu when it took place before the war on Iran began, and that was in that situation room, apparently he gave a full-on PowerPoint presentation and so on, and tried to convince the American leadership that it would be a quick affair like Venezuela, that you can actually go and do with Iran in a few days. You just eliminate their leadership, eliminate their top leadership, and there will be a regime change, and that's the end of the story. Trump and Pete Hegseth were both very, very, from the American establishment point of view, very stupid to fall for it, because now a large part of the American establishment feels no American president, this stunt has been tried by Benjamin Netanyahu with a number of presidents in the past. Nobody fell for this bait. Now Trump is trying to wriggle out of it and saying it's Pete Hegseth who started it and so on. But that's not the point. I think the point is that all this signals the last days of the US empire. And this signals, and it has clearly now driven a wedge between the US and the NATO, US and EU, and all other allies that the US had. What is even more important is that within the United States, so just yesterday there was a demonstration of the Iraq war veterans, Iraq onwards, various war veterans inside Capitol Hill. Many of them were arrested, but they were all demonstrating against this mad war, this forever war, because they now know, in any case, that this could not have been, any military person would have known that this could not have been a short, sharp war. What they did not know and what they could not have realized, and where I think even despite heavy Mossad penetration inside Iran, what they could not really figure out was that in 47 years of sanctions and Iran being cut off from the world, something had drastically changed inside Iran which they had no clue about. They did not know. They were thinking of these guys as some fundamentalist, long bearded, in the image of Khamenei. But you look at the Iranian leadership now, they're all people who have done, like, they talk sense. They are people who are highly educated, who have been accomplished in their fields, philosophy, mathematics, and so on and so forth. They don't talk like these ruffians like Pete Hegseth and Donald Trump and so on. So this whole Epstein gang in the US actually, in a way, very dramatically highlights the complete ignorance or the complete cluelessness about the world with which they are dealing. And once they attacked Iran, they actually realized that this was a completely different ball game, that Iran is not firing Chinese-made missiles. Of course, the most disgusting but unsurprising part of it was that the war began on almost the first day or the beginning of Ramadan. And they had probably calculated that this is the time they will not be able to either retaliate and so on and so forth, being good Muslims that they are. Well, what they were in for was a big surprise, not just in terms of the retaliation, but the kind of retaliation that they got, and the way in which large parts of many Israeli cities and US military bases in and around Israel were destroyed. So this, I think, presents a very, very sharp contrast between with the Epstein gang. I will not make a judgment here about, right now, this is not the problem we are discussing, right? My understanding about all regimes in the world right now is that ordinary people are all hostage to their states, and with practically no voice when it comes to many crucial matters. On that, there's not much difference, and I'm not discussing here the questions of the earlier movements and struggles which had happened inside Iran, on which we have that's a separate matter we can discuss. But those should not be confused with the fact that today we are on the cusp of a global power shift in which Iran has played and is going to be playing a fundamental role. The Iranian response, whatever shift which has happened in the last 2 years, I mean since we last talked about it during our Gaza meeting, but especially since February, in the last 2 months, that big shift has not been enabled by lectures. It has been enabled actually by Iran's demonstration of a military capability, military response, which has shown the Western world that, and especially the US, that they cannot go around doing the kind of गुंडागर्दी that they used to do. तो ये तो इनका दुनिया भर में इतिहास रहा है और now it looks very surprising कि ऐसा कैसे हुआ कि एक मुल्क जिसके 2500 साल के वजूद में 2030 साल वो लड़ा, हर कोई ना कोई जंग लड़ता रहा. It has been attacking some country or the other, the United States. और दूसरा मुल्क इज़राइल अपने जन्म के बाद से लगातार अपने आसपास के मुल्कों पर हमला करता चला जा रहा है. But they are not the terrorist states. Who are the terrorist states? Those who have not attacked anybody. Iran has not attacked anybody. Iraq Iran का जो झंझट हुआ था, that was also instigated in a way by the Americans. But all the states that have been designated, or all the people who have been designated as terrorists, they are not the terrorists. If you look at the history, जो असली दहशतगर्द हैं वो तो ये लोग हैं, वो ये दो मुल्क हैं ख़ास तौर पे, जिन्होंने पिछले 100 साल में अमेरिका ने पिछले 100 साल से भी कम में, एक्चुअली सेकेंड वर्ल्ड वॉर के बाद से अगर कहें तो about 38 million people have been sent to their death because of American interventions and attacks. और throughout 20वीं सदी में अमेरिका ने कम से कम 100, और ये एस्टेब्लिश्ड में उन चीज़ों की बात कर रहा हूँ जिनमें प्रूव हो चुका है. बहुत सारी ऐसी चीज़ें हैं जहाँ पे प्रूव नहीं हुआ, जहाँ पे ये अंदेशा किया या हुआ है, या आप ये कह सकते हैं कि आप कयास लगा सकते हैं अमेरिकन इन्वॉल्वमेंट की कुछ सबूत थोड़े बहुत हैं सर्कमस्टेंशियल. लेकिन 100 ऐसे डॉक्यूमेंटेड केसेस हैं जहां या तो रेजिम चेंज के लिए या डायरेक्ट वॉर, जिसमें वियतनाम वॉर भी शामिल है, ये अमेरिका ने पूरी 20वीं सदी में किया है. तो असल दहशतगर्द कौन है, ये सवाल जो है आज ईरान ने हमें दिखा दिया. एक तरह से अगर ये नहीं होता और अमेरिका और इज़राइल का ये जो गठजोड़ है ये इस तरह से खुला नहीं होता, तो शायद हम लोग पीछे के उस इतिहास की तरफ भी उस तरह से नहीं देख पाते. So in a way, I think what has happened is that this provides us a particular vantage point from which to look at. In fact, Gaza से ही शुरू हो गया था वो, and I think Gaza provides the kind of window into the past where you can see the history of settler colonialism, genocides, ethnic cleansing, all that happening across the world. But every time the US intervenes, and in West Asia, the interventions have all been instigated or pushed by Israel in its larger Greater Israel project in trying to achieve that. ईरान आखिरी बाकी था जो नहीं कर पाए वो, नहीं तो इराक से लेके सीरिया तक उन्होंने सब जगह रेजिम चेंज करने के लिए जो हथकंडे अपनाने थे अपनाए, और काफ़ी हद तक सफलतापूर्वक अपनाए. ईरान में वो कर नहीं पाए, and they had actually expected that once they did this and once they had eliminated the top leadership, the picture would be, it would be a cakewalk for them. But what the second thing with which Iran surprised the world was the fact that, as they've been saying, we had been preparing for this as a 10-year war. We knew that this will not be a short, sharp war. So we have our second and third and fourth lines of defense already ready. You eliminate one round, that doesn't mean you're decapitating our country. So, in a sense, I think this moment signals a very big beginning of a very big global shift of power. But what I want to actually talk a little bit about before I hand over the mic to Amir is that if you look at the whole, many of us who have lived through the 9/11 Twin Towers movement, and then whatever happened after that, the war on terror, then the war on Afghanistan and the war on Iraq and so on. Some things did not always seem right, but one could never really put their finger on what exactly was going on. Of course, also because one is not always continuously, we are also dealing with all the stuff that is happening in our own country. So you're not always continuously keyed into every development that's taking place across the globe. But the fact of the matter now, as it emerges, for example, after 9/11, there was this film by Michael Moore called Fahrenheit 9/11, in which he had actually hinted that just after the fall of the Twin Towers, the Saudis, who had a long business partnership with the Bush family, were given safe passage and taken out of the US. And the attack started on Afghanistan and later Iraq, who had nothing to do with anything in the September 11 developments. So what was it? What was going on? That was the kind of question that actually a lot of people had started raising. And I remember that many people at that time, in fact, said that this is an inside job. There are a lot of conspiracy theories also, so one doesn't always easily lend credence to all that. But lately, some documents have also now come to light, and some of these you can find on archive.org, which show that it could well have been a false flag operation by the Israeli and the American intelligence together. Most certainly that place was leased out, some Jewish billionaires are involved in it, and so on, and how the whole operation happened. Some of that, then those questions that remained with us start falling into the picture, starts becoming clear, and things start falling into place. तो इसलिए वहाँ से अगर हम शुरू करके देखें तो जितना उसके बाद इन्होंने इराक के मामले को लेकर वेपन्स ऑफ मैस डिस्ट्रक्शन का एक पूरा किस्सा खड़ा किया, उसके ऊपर एक पूरा नैरेटिव सेट हुआ, उसके बाद उसको सारी दुनिया को झांसे में डालकर एक लंबी वॉर की शुरुआत हुई जिसने एक तरह से मिडिल ईस्ट तबाह कर दिया. तो ये सिलसिला जो वहाँ से शुरू होता है, ये सिर्फ एक बानगी है उस रिश्ते की जो अमेरिका और इजराइल में 50s से डेवलप हो रहा था. और आप हैरान होंगे, मतलब ये सवाल आज भी कोई पूछता नहीं है. जब भी बात हो रही है, यूरेनियम एनरिचमेंट की बात हो रही है, ईरान के न्यूक्लियर इश्यूज, न्यूक्लियर प्रोग्राम की बात हो रही है, इजराइल के न्यूक्लियर प्रोग्राम की बात किसी वेस्टर्न मीडिया में करते देखा है किसी ने कि ये कितना, इट इज़ एन एंटायरली इलीगल न्यूक्लियर प्रोग्राम. दे हैव न्यूक्लियर वेपन्स. ईरान did not have nuclear weapons, they do not have nuclear weapons, and in fact at one point they decided they will not have nuclear weapons. अब ज़रूर वो इस बात को कह रहे हैं कि अगर हमें यहाँ इस दुनिया में ज़िंदा रहना है तो हमें ज़रूरत पड़ेगी. They might even contemplate, I won't be surprised, they might even contemplate walking out of the NPT and so on, the Non-Proliferation Treaty. But if you look at the US thing, the story goes back to actually mid-50s, and some of the more recently released classified documents from the US show that John F. Kennedy had opposed Israel's attempts to develop nuclear weapons. And he had actually written a very strong letter to Ben-Gurion, who was the president of Israel at that time, and that soon after that, the tension started developing, and eventually JFK was assassinated. And today, many people are inclined to actually believe that the connection between John F. Kennedy's assassination and his opposition to Israel developing its nuclear program may be much more solid than we imagine, because ever since then the path was cleared for Israel to develop its nuclear weapons and to develop it in complete collaboration with what sometimes in conspiracy theory language is called the deep state. Now, I am not particularly fond of this. Madhu Kishwar thinks even what RSS is the deep state and so on. I mean, anybody can call anything the deep state. So Donald Trump also says this is the deep state which is actually acting. This is basically a very convenient conspiracy theory term. I don't usually use that term, but yes, very important sections within the US establishment, US defense and military establishment, they have been actively aiding and abetting Israel's nuclear program. And what is even more interesting is that the International Atomic Energy Association, the Secretary General or whatever it is called, Philip Grossi, has actually looked the other way. I mean, he knew whatever is going on. There are now evidence that he was actually allowing Israel to develop it. All the fire was concentrated and all the focus, the light. So this is like a stage in which if you focus all the light and the action in one part, you can't actually, you're not going to look at what's happening there. That's how Israel's nuclear weapons program developed. All the time when you were Israel was making statements to the United States that Iran is now 6 months away from making nuclear weapons, it's now 2 weeks away from making nuclear weapons and so on, which has been saying from the 90s. So in that sense, I think this big shift is something which we will see more of once this ceasefire thing comes to an end, because I don't think the ceasefire is actually going to work. It has for the time being halted, but I think they've managed to kind of break Lebanon out of it, and if Lebanon enters into a bilateral thing, it's going to be worse off. But I just want to conclude with a little bit about this whole Epstein business, because that is in a sense very crucial to the way the American establishment and American politicians have been drawn into becoming stooges of Israel. It's often, one can wonder, how is it that a small state like Israel can exert so much pressure on the foreign policy of a state like the superpower like the United States. Of course, the guilt of the Holocaust is there, but I also want to make that very clear that this is no guilt. It is, if there were guilt, then the Jews who were persecuted during Nazism and the run up to Nazism they would have been accommodated within Europe somewhere, right? You don't actually thrust, no, as late as 1939, no European power was willing to accommodate the Jews who were fleeing Nazi persecution from Germany. They just wanted, in fact, they wanted to get rid of their own Jews also. So they had to find another place. And this Israel business actually came out much later. It came out first, earlier they toyed with the idea of Uganda, then they toyed with the idea of Kenya, then they toyed with the idea of some other places, and finally they hit upon this great biblical, that the great biblical justification can be marshaled when if you think of settling them in Palestine. So anyway, that's a separate story. But the way this has actually influenced or in fact managed to trap many of the American and not just American, I am sure our own leaders are pretty much involved in it. I think the key issue here, the obscene, disgusting, violent pedophilia and this whole pedophilic network run by Jeffrey Epstein was, yes, it was about, it was a sex racket at one level, but it was a sex racket which was being run for a global power network. It wasn't simply a sex racket which was being run for its own sake. This was a way of trapping. You know, you don't have thousands and thousands and thousands of audio-visual material and files and emails and so on preserved of all your crimes. Those have been preserved simply because they can be used as blackmail tools. And if you really want to, I mean, I would like to know what is it that made Mr. Modi suddenly dance, well, dance metaphorically or whatever, before Trump and Netanyahu, and finally, just on the eve of the war, the day before the war, go and hug Netanyahu and tell him your land is my fatherland and so on. There is something deeper here. So there is one, I don't undermine, there is one, a deep ideological affinity between Hindutva and Zionism. But, and that ideological affinity has to do with Islam. Let's be very clear, there's a common enemy called Islam and the Muslims, and that is where the ideological affinity between these two. Otherwise, RSS's ideological affinity was equally with Hitler as far as his methods go. But the Jews are not their main enemy. Soros may be an exception, but their real enemy, on which they find common ground with Zionism, are in the Zionist state, are quote unquote the Muslims. But I think the larger ideological affinity apart, the real question here, which makes me wonder, is how is it that all this happened so rapidly? And now, once we had Mr. Hardeep Puri's references coming out, there were also, we were told, references to Modi himself. So, all these show that this network of pedophilic exploitation of young girls has been actually taken as a kind of node to get politicians from across the world, trap them into it, blackmail them. Those whom you can buy over, you buy over. Those whom you cannot buy over, you trap them in this way. And so this is how this power network has worked. I'm told that Martin Scorsese made this the last film, which was eventually massacred because in it he had what's the name of the film? I'm forgetting. But in which he had actually kind of discussed this whole Epstein network, not without naming Epstein, but this whole network of a sex and power racket, which was at the center of his concerns and I'm told that when finally before the final cut, he was asked to remove the last sections. He did remove, but finally he didn't, I think, but he was killed after that, and then it was removed. So he was found dead, and later, that before it was released, those sections were removed from the film. So there is obviously something much bigger here. It's not a simple question of one Jeffrey Epstein and his accomplice Ghislaine Maxwell. There is a whole large big network here which has to do with the global power elite. And the Epstein Coalition, which is the term now many Iranian intellectuals are using, this Epstein Coalition involves, of course, US and Israel, but it also involves a large number of such politicians who are in key places in many other parts of the world. Anyway, I'll finish with this. Thank you.